The silence hung over St. Peter's Square. The sky turned orange and gold as the sun slowly set behind the columns of the basilica, casting long shadows over the crowd that filled every inch of the sacred space. Thousands of the faithful were there, not only to witness a historic moment, but to feel firsthand the weight of the farewell of a pope who defied traditions and broke down barriers within the Catholic Church. It was an unprecedented event, a gesture that to many seemed unimaginable. The leader of the largest religious institution in the world, a man whose presence had become a symbol of renewal and change, was about to say goodbye, not due to extreme age or serious health problems, but by his own decision. And there he was, before an emotional crowd, with eyes filled with a serenity that only those fully aware of their role and choices can possess. The wind blew, carrying whispers, prayers, and held-back tears. Some people held rosaries between their fingers, clutching them with devotion, while others raised small thank you signs. The bells of the basilica had not yet sounded, but the pounding of hearts became almost palpable in the air. Then a voice echoed, soft yet firm. "Thank you for walking with me." Few words were spoken at that moment, but their weight was immense. A farewell that was not merely the goodbye of a leader. It was the closing of a transformative era within the Church. For many, that farewell signified the end of renewed hope. For others, it was the beginning of a legacy that would continue to resonate for decades. Looking back, Pope Francis's journey from the very start was marked by bold choices. From the moment he appeared on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, without the luxurious ornaments of his predecessors, refusing the golden cross and keeping the simple iron cross he had always carried, it was clear that his mission would be different. His choice of name was the first great declaration. Francis, inspired by the humble St. Francis of Assisi, the saint of the poor, the abandoned, and those who renounced power in the name of faith. From that day on, the Vatican was never the same. Unlike previous popes who lived in the apostolic palace, surrounded by gold and Renaissance frescoes, Francis chose to live in a small apartment in Casa Santa Marta, together with other religious. He refused limousines and opted for simple cars to get around. He declined to wear luxurious garments and, whenever possible, walked among the people. These gestures, which might have seemed small, represented something much greater. They were a clear sign that his papacy would not be based on symbols of power, but on closeness to the faithful. But Francis was not merely a pope of symbolic gestures. His humble stance came with concrete actions that profoundly transformed the Church. One of his first major battles was against corruption within the Vatican. The Vatican Bank, for years the target of money laundering allegations and financial scandals, became the focus of rigorous investigations under his leadership. He promoted drastic reforms, dismissed powerful figures, and implemented transparent audits. Yet it was not only in the financial realm that Francis made history. The Pope faced one of the greatest challenges of the modern Church: the scandals of sexual abuse that had been silenced for years. Unlike his predecessors, who often avoided addressing the issue openly, Francis was direct. He publicly denounced the culture of cover-up within the Church, expelled bishops and cardinals involved, and implemented measures to ensure that victims were heard and protected. This, however, earned him enemies within the clergy itself. Conservative factions saw his actions as threats to the traditional structure of the Church. Rumors began to circulate. Anonymous letters appeared in the corridors of the Vatican. There were those who saw Francis as a necessary reformer, and those who viewed him as someone going too far. But he remained steadfast. Beyond internal battles, Francis also became a global leader on social issues. In powerful speeches, he denounced economic inequality, the exploitation of the poor, and the indifference of the powerful. He refused to maintain the neutrality that many expected from a pope. He confronted political leaders around the world, condemning economic systems that favored a few and left millions marginalized. He did not fear to criticize unbridled capitalism, calling it a model that fed misery and injustice. His discourse on the culture of discard resonated with millions. To him, modern society not only consumed goods irresponsibly, but also discarded human lives. The poor, the elderly, refugees, the sick. Everyone was treated as disposable in a world where wealth and power were valued above human dignity. But his vision of justice went beyond economic issues. The environment was also a central theme of his papacy. His encyclical Laudato Si, one of the most impactful ever written by a church leader, was not only a call to preserve the planet, but also a fierce critique of the environmental destruction caused by human greed. He argued that caring for the environment was not just an ecological issue, but a spiritual duty. The earth as divine creation should be protected. Moreover, he denounced that those most affected by environmental destruction were precisely the poorest, those who contributed the least to the problem, yet suffered its worst consequences. His positions, although admired by many, also generated strong criticisms. There were attempts to discredit him. Many accused him of being too radical, but he did not back down. However, every battle comes at a cost, and Francis knew that. After years of confrontations, covert attacks, internal and external resistance, he realized that his mission as Pope had reached a crucial point. His decision to leave the office was not born out of weakness, but of conviction. He believed that the Church needed a leader with renewed strength to continue the work he had started. That farewell night, before the crowd gathered in St. Peter's Square, his words were simple yet powerful. May God always bless you. It was the last time he addressed the people as Pope, yet his actions, his words, and his courage would echo far beyond that moment. Francis showed the world that being a leader does not mean accumulating power, but using it to serve. He proved that faith should not be an instrument of judgment, but a bridge to unite people. His departure was not a goodbye. It was an invitation for the legacy of compassion, humility, and justice that he built to remain alive in the Church and in the heart of every believer. St. Peter's Square remained full for hours after his farewell. The silence had given way to a wave of reflections, prayers, and memories. The man left. The legacy, however, did not. But what happens when a leader of such influence decides to leave? What remains of a papacy that transformed not only the Church, but also the way the world views faith? Questions hung in the air as the faithful in St. Peter's Square remained motionless, trying to absorb the significance of that moment. Some wept, others simply contemplated in silence, while cameras captured every detail of the farewell. But one thing was certain. Pope Francis's resignation did not signify the end of his mission. His departure was, in fact, a symbol of the very teaching he had preached over the years. From the very beginning, he made it clear that the papacy was not about power or status, but about service. Francis believed that the Church should be a refuge for the needy, not a palace of privileges for a few. His decision to step down was aligned with that principle. He did not wish to perpetuate his leadership out of pride or tradition. He knew his mission had been fulfilled and that the Church needed to move forward with new challenges and new leadership. Yet not everyone accepted his departure easily. Within the Vatican, conservative groups saw the resignation as an act of weakness, a break with tradition that could generate instability in the institution. Some believed that he should continue, regardless of the challenges. Others, more critical, viewed his resignation as an opportunity to reverse many of the reforms he had implemented. The truth is, his decision to step aside was not made impulsively. Behind the curtains of the Vatican, many events suggested that Pope Francis faced intense pressures. Over the years, the changes he implemented met with significant resistance, and there were indications that certain forces within the church preferred to see him leave. The weight of responsibility, internal challenges, and constant battles led him to deeply reflect on the future of the church and his role within it. But Francis was not concerned with the power plays within the Roman Curia. His focus was always on the people. During his papacy, he visited the most forgotten places in the world, from favelas in Brazil to refugee camps in Syria. He knelt before prisoners, washed the feet of the marginalized, embraced the sick, and shared meals with the homeless. He did what few church leaders had the courage to do. He brought the papacy to the streets, and that is what made his farewell so impactful. Pope Francis was not merely leaving a position, he was leaving a living legacy that would continue in every person touched by his message of compassion and justice. His papacy was a turning point, both for the church and for the world. He faced criticism, resistance, and even threats, but he never wavered from his mission. He knew he could not change everything alone, but he believed that every step toward reform was a step toward a better future. In addition to his reforms within the church, Francis also took a stand on global issues. He spoke about the refugee crisis, advocating that countries open their doors to those fleeing war and persecution. He confronted world leaders by denouncing the exploitation of workers and social inequality. He criticized environmental destruction, insisting that caring for the earth was a moral duty of all humanity. Yet his vision was not accepted by everyone. Within the Vatican, many believed that he was going too far. There were rumors that some members of the high hierarchy tried to undermine his authority, leaking documents and attempting to weaken him politically. The pressure on him increased with each passing year. And then came the decision that shocked the world: his resignation. That farewell night, as he slowly walked back into the Vatican for the last time as Pope, his thoughts were calm. He had fulfilled his mission. He had challenged the forces that needed to be challenged. He had been the voice of the poor, the marginalized, and the forgotten. And above all, he had remained true to his faith. The faithful in the square lingered for a long time, some still praying, others simply reflecting. Many knew that that moment was not the end of something, but the beginning of a new phase for the church. Francis proved that true leadership is not measured by the time someone holds office, but by the impact they leave behind. His legacy was not in the golden walls of the Vatican, but in the hearts of those who heard his message and were inspired to act. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson he left us. Faith should not be static, but dynamic. It must move, touch lives, and transform the world. Because in the end, the true mission of a leader is not to remain in power, but to ensure that his message continues to live on, even after his departure. Pope Francis departed, but his message, his courage, and his revolution within the Catholic Church will continue to echo for many years. St. Peter's Square, even after his exit, remained a place of reflection. Many of those present that night would never forget that moment. His name, his figure, and his words would be cited for generations to come, and his decision to resign would remain one of the most significant events in the history of the modern church. But what will become of the church's future? Many wondered what would come next. Francis's departure paved the way for new challenges and new leadership. The world was in constant change, and the church would need to continue adapting. But one thing was certain: the seed planted by Francis would never stop growing. His reforms, his words, and his actions influenced millions. His call for compassion, his defense of the most vulnerable, and his commitment to social justice marked a before and after in the history of the Christian faith. Perhaps his departure was not an end, but an invitation for each of us to continue his mission. If you enjoyed this content and want to keep receiving reflections that strengthen your faith, do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and activate notifications. Join our community and help spread this message of hope and transformation.